Yeah, I might amplify it a bit more on Twitter and just be like, "Hey guys, this is starting right now. You can go to this link," because people otherwise won't know what to do.
What the
Yeah.
fuck?
Let's see, does that link work? Wait, double talk? Am I getting a double talk? No. Okay.
No, you shouldn't. Unless you're
Yeah,
watching it on Twitch, then you will.
we should be good. Yeah. Okay, so that one is working. Cool.
Okay. I'm always afraid to like open a window because I don't want to stream certain windows. Okay. Hello, everybody.
It's just because they have to go and click on it. It doesn't like show up at the top of their screen and go, "Hey, idiot, it's going on right now." It's like, oh, you just have to remind.
Well, if they have the app, it's
then it
really
does
useful.
notify 'em?
Yeah. It's like I think the Twitch notification in the app is like one of the best apps at notifying people.
There you go. Your wife left her box of wine here, and I've been drinking it, so you can't have her back.
What did she leave?
A box of wine.
Yeah, I left it. I forgot to pick it up.
The housewarming gift. You just drink it. You did a long drive. I figured you needed something to drink while you were driving.
Not wine, my friend. I prefer whiskey when I'm driving.
Okay, good. It's important.
Safer.
Safer.
Yeah, it's much safer. It's State Trooper approved.
But, yeah.
So we're gonna start in like I don't know, like 2 or 3 minutes or something. We're just giving people a chance to join.
Yeah. And thank you guys for sticking around. Put it out on Twitter. Let other people know. They can hop right on in, and we'll jump into this in just a couple minutes.
Fellow Russophobes. I emailed myself a video. I have no clue what the video is because I forgot. But I'm thinking I could just play the video now and it's like
Which video?
I don't know what it is. I forgot what it is. I emailed it myself and all I called it was tank. There's no other description, just tank.
You should be able to easily search for that, right? Okay.
The tank blew up.
Nice. Which tank is it?
I don't know. I'm gonna go back to the beginning. Okay. I guess it just starts with an explosion.
Something with an autoloader, it looks like.
Okay, whose tank is it? That's my question.
It's Russian. It's a Russian. This is a Ukrainian video. Okay. I don't know anything about this video. I saw it. I thought it was cool, and I emailed it to myself.
Here you go.
Nice.
What is it? If you guys want to, if you're listening here, if you want to amplify it on Twitter, we'll get a few more folks in here, and then we'll be kicking it off in just a couple minutes.
Okay, so that was the random video I emailed myself.
Did we ever get more information on what's up with that Russian anti-air, like the Pantsir on top of a building? I think it's performative. I can't understand why else they would do it.
No, it's
But-
not. They're defending there because they remember there were strikes on the in Crimea and Sevastopol on their Black Sea Fleet headquarters. They are afraid of the same thing.
In Moscow?
'Cause, why not? If
I mean-
if we can fly, if we can get to Engels, that is how far? It's like 500 miles.
I mean, the distance
why
is
not
one
Moscow?
thing, but there's like gotta be like more air defense like between Ukraine and Moscow. What do you think?
Well, what that air defense doing? You know.
Sitting on a roof?
Yeah, apparently. But they have like S500s. Isn't that a real thing? Like in very limited quantity, all just sitting around Moscow.
Well, it's you when you build air defense, you build it layered. You build first layer is obviously something like S500, S400, S300. Then you have smaller level air defenses. Then you have up to those like Panzer, which is really last layer, almost the last layer of
Yeah.
air
So
defense.
you have one layer of Pantsir in a field, and then your last layer is on top of the roof you're defending, right?
That seems like the way you're supposed to do things. It's. Did anything actually? I didn't watch it because other things to do with my time. But did Putin's speech say anything except that everything is going to continue as it has been?
When did he speak? Maybe there
Like
was
2
new one.
days
That's why I'm
ago.
asking.
I think.
I didn't listen to it. I just heard like a synopsis of it, and it was just all the same boring stuff that he always says. I didn't really get much out of it.
Yeah.
It's the usual soup that he, ever blames everyone, and everyone is a Nazi but him.
Well, that makes
I
it
listened.
really,
Huh?
that makes it really convenient and easy then.
He said something like, "What struck me is that there is no justification for a collaboration with Nazis. There's just no such thing." And then, like 8 years ago, he said, "Well, we signed a pact with Nazis because it was different times, so that's fine."
Yeah.
Usual soup of hatred and
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Right there, so.
Okay, so I guess we could start.
Sure. Awesome. I mean, do we just kick off in the northwest and go clockwise, and then just kind of stop section by section?
Yeah.
Is there any way to enable the other icons on your map? The ones.
Sure,
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I can
I
turn
like the little
on.
alien.
Yep,
It
that
reminds me.
actually was an alien attack.
Yeah. No, it reminds me that some people still drink too heavily.
Yeah,
But
that was September 14th alien attack in Kyiv.
Yeah. it's being covered up. Mainstream news is lying to you. That's where the UFOs landed. It's Independence Day. All right. Well, in that case,
My
let's
favorite
kick-
one is the little ghost.
the ghost. I thought those were pretty funny. You have like 2 of them, don't you, down there?
Yeah, the ghosts are. These
They're
were like military installations that they completely abandoned, so they're ghosts now.
Fair enough. All right. Well, with that, let's dive into it. There's going to be sort of a general, update with expert stuff from Andrew and Constantine. So feel free to jump in anytime. We'll start in Belarus, proceed clockwise, and then end with general statements. So in Belarus, Russian movement does continue around and in the vicinity of the border in southwestern Belarus, which continues to be used for stoking concerns about a potential Russian assault, potentially towards Rivne and the nuclear power plant there. However, per Belarusian opposition groups, the Russian troops that were deployed here previously have rotated out to be replaced with newly conscripted soldiers who are being trained and provisioned at the Belarusian government's expense. The Ukrainian intel services continue to maintain that there is no observation of Russian or Belarusian assault groups forming, which would be a necessary condition for any assault towards this area. They further state that such threats are, quote, an information operation, unquote, to draw Ukrainian troops away from the east of the country. However, joint flight exercises with Belarusian and Russian aircraft have begun in Belarus, and it is anticipated to last at least until February 1st. While this has currently led to an increase in air raid warnings in Ukraine, there have still been no observed missile launches from Belarus since I want to say October, although there have been a number of drone strikes launched. Moving towards Kiev and western Ukraine and the politics of the region. Following the large Russian missile salvo on the 14th, power interruptions continue across Ukraine, with a number of power plants being damaged rather severely. The energy deficit across the country has likewise been increased, and both planned and unplanned rolling blackouts continue. Missile strikes ranged as far west as Lviv, Odessa, and Ivano-Frankivsk, as well as S-300 strikes along the front line. The bulk of these missiles were air-launched cruise missiles. As a result of, to put it politely, misstatements made by Ukrainian Presidential Office spokesman Arestovich, which implied that the Ukrainian air defenses were instrumentally responsible for a Russian missile strike in Dnipro that caused massive civilian casualties, a number of Ukrainian parliamentarians demanded his resignation. Arestovich submitted his resignation, and the Ukrainian Presidential Office has accepted it as of today. Arestovich has had a history of statements not quite grounded in reality, but this one, and the massive casualties linked to it, appear to have been the final straw.
Extremely offensive.
Yeah, to put it mildly. Following the helicopter crash in Brovary, the suburb to the northeast of Kiev, on the 18th, which killed 3 members of the senior leadership of the Ukrainian Ministry of Internal Affairs, along with 15 others when the helicopter crashed at a kindergarten, 25 people have been reported as injured. A large investigation into the accident is underway, with speculation that the helicopter, which was reportedly flying low, hit a power line after some kind of onboard incident leading to the crash. Some 2,000 people have been asked for eyewitness testimony or other reports, with several hundred of them actually seeing the crash occur. In a long-running scandal, and a victory for, despite the tragic circumstances, accountability, a Ukrainian banker and negotiator who had been suspected of treason after working with the Russian delegation in Belarus prior to the war, and unfortunately was summarily executed in captivity by a Ukrainian security service member in March, has been revealed not to have been a traitor at all. In fact, the man was working to warn Ukrainian intelligence services about the Russian plans to assault Kiev before the invasion. The individual was buried with state honors by Zelensky, and an investigation into his death and prosecution of those responsible is undergoing. Per the Ukrainian government, some 15,000 Ukrainian citizens are missing, and 3,400 of them are confirmed to be Russian prisoners. This includes both military and civilian. Otherwise, that's about everything I have for Kiev and Western Ukraine. Do you guys have anything you want to add?
Not really. I mean, this is kind of old news at this point, but there were various missile strikes and stuff, but
Yeah.
that was like a week ago at this point, so.
Yeah, just about on Saturday. Same thing, the Sumy, Chernihiv, and Kharkiv city region. Russian forces continue to shell with abandon along the border area, destroying houses, and there has been consistent Russian shelling to the northeast of Kharkiv, around Vovchansk and the border, and alleged Ukrainian responses prompting Russian air defenses over Belgorod, as well as unspecified explosions. This seems to be, of all the areas that Russia is shelling right now, they have been continuing to devote time and energy to this little area to the north of Kharkiv, because they have a large grouping of troops in Belgorod.
Yeah, there's I have some news. Today, where was that town? I can't remember where it was, but they. Anyway, I'll think of it. Oh, it's right here. Timofivka or Fivka. Anyway, they shelled this town for over an hour today for no apparent reason. Just shelling it over and over and over again. But I've marked all of the towns that I know of getting shelled in the Sumy area. They've been shelling about 10 to 20 towns per day, in this area. But yeah,
A lot of
and
that is mortars and grenade launchers rather than heavy artillery, though, right? Like I wasn't.
usually they occasionally will send in like grads, like they'll shoot like 30 or 60 grads at it, like grad rockets at it at a time. It depends. The towns really close, I think, are all mortars, but they occasionally hit a town that's like further out, like around here, and that's usually a grad.
And there have been speculation, because we saw this with the Russian Air Force, that these have been used not just to harass Ukrainians, but also as quite literally target practice for Russian crews. Earlier, before, frankly, I want to say this was back in like May, Russian pilots that had less combat experience, had never been in Syria, were noted north of Kharkiv and elsewhere, where the idea was that they could get their training there before they deployed elsewhere. Perhaps the same thing we're seeing with the mortars and artillery crews, but that's just a supposition. Otherwise, do you guys want to move to Kupiansk, Crimea, and Svatove?
Yep.
So Russian forces continue to shell Ukraine positions around Kupiansk and to the area due north of it near Dvorchna. There are skirmishes and assaults from both sides to the north of Kupiansk currently, with no apparent major change on the ground, although we have seen a little bit more of an uptick in artillery here. Russian and Ukrainian shelling continues along the east of the Kupiansk-Svatove highway, with some noted Ukrainian local successes around Novoselivske that we can dig into. Novoselivske lies along the highway towards Svatove and could serve as a springboard for further gains due to its higher elevation, a couple hundred feet, over Russian positions to the east all the way down to the Russian stronghold of Svatove that everything is vectoring towards here. Should Ukraine be able to dislodge Russian forces from their downhill positions in the immediate neighboring town of Kuzymivka, there are considerable options for Ukraine to press further down the highway and control the fields around it. This is an area worth keeping an eye on, and an area that both Konstantin and Andrew know quite a bit about.
I heard an interesting comment about this area today. They said that this attack vector on Svatove, it is very similar to the type of fighting that happened in World War II in the Pacific. That the sort of defenses that Russia is using is very similar to what the Japanese were using, that the American Marines had to fight against. So they said that's the sort of fighting that you can expect in this area. It's like Pacific style World War II fighting. So we have some like World War I style fighting in some places, and here's your like Pacific Japanese style fighting.
Do you mean like there's a ton of bunkers in these hills, or almost like island hopping where they have to clear one hill, get that whole area, and then regroup and then go clear another hill and sort of hop all the way down?
It's because the way that you defend this area is defending the far side of the hill. So in order to attack it, you have to like fight your way up the hill while they're on the other side. It's a sort of fighting that the Japanese perfected in World War II, where you like each of these little tiny hills is going to be a defensive point.
Wow. Do you think there's a likelihood that if and when Ukraine is able to dislodge Russian forces from Kuzymivka, because the Russians have been fighting against that eventuality for some time now, that they can push down to Kolonchivka, or however you say it, and then just sort of proceed down the highway?
Well, I think these are
into the hills first before they
I think these are two separate groups that are like one. I think it's like one battalion is pushing towards like Novoselivska, and then there's another battalion that's pushing south. So I think they're two different groups that are working together. But I think personally, I think all five of these towns are going to be held by Ukraine in the near-ish future. Like I'm not going to put a date on it, but I think they're going to get like this area here, and then after that, it's going to be harder. It's going to be a battle of attrition, because you can't just charge towards Svatove, there's all of these defensive positions in between. They're like natural defensive positions. So there's a word for this. I'm trying to remember what the word is. Give me a second. I'll think of it. Reverse slope. That's what it's called. The reverse slope defensive positions. And as you get closer to Svatove, you see like all of these like low points. All of these are going to be like individual channels. So each of these can be independently defended. So it's going to be kind of difficult to attack from here. But the important thing is to apply the pressure and force Russia to actually defend it so that they can't send like everyone to Kremenna.
I mean, and while there's certainly a lot of capabilities for defenses there, is it fair that as you come down from Kuzumivka towards Svatove, to the east there's generally a lower elevation than the highway, so whoever
Yes.
has the highway should be able to have at least the ability to drop mortars and artillery and whatever have you on them.
Yeah.
It doesn't make it easy by any means, but there's a definite advantage here, which is why we've seen Russia fighting so hard around Kuzumivka and Novoselivsk, because there they have a base. It's at the bottom of a hill. The town that Ukraine was trying to take is at the top of the hill, and that's not a good position to be in when you can just drop mortars on somebody all day.
Yes, it's definitely low ground. So Ukraine has the high ground advantage, but Russia has the advantage of using the reverse slope of all these little hills. They can hide on the other side of the hill and use the hill as cover, which is an advantage, although it might be less of an advantage as it used to be, like in World War II, because of the way that we use drones now. That could lessen that advantage. I know we're gonna see it play out. So,
like it's definitely still very challenging, and it has been challenging and will be challenging if you're trying to assault through there because of these slopes and hills and forested terrain. But insofar as just sitting on the highway and shelling them, which does not necessarily get rid of them, you still have to go in there afterwards. This is part of the reason why Russia and Ukraine both have dedicated their forces here. It's not just, oh, these are two towns that are right next to each other and they're all flat plain. There's some terrain relief features here.
yes.
But
Yeah.
Okay. I guess pushing down to Kreminna real quick. Russian and Ukrainian forces continue to skirmish around Kreminna with no Ukrainian seizure of territory explicitly confirmed, although there's been claims about Dubrova. It appears that the Ukrainian offensive here in recent weeks has been somewhat blunted by large Russian reinforcements, particularly with newly mobilized soldiers, although offensive operations are still ongoing, and there seems to have been a noted reduction in Russian assault attempts or spoiling attacks in the last week or so. Is that fair?
Yeah, there's this road here. It's called like Sanatorna. I've heard that Russia is using this road to set up artillery. Like they have artillery like here, and they're using this artillery to cover like this forested area. So this road right here, I've heard, is pretty important for Ukraine to take care of. And I don't know what type of artillery it is. It could just be heavy mortars. I'm not really sure, but I know I've heard that this road right here is what they're using as their artillery position to hit everything. So. And that also, them using this position for artillery tells you that Ukraine isn't there, obviously. So a lot of these talk that Ukraine is very, very close to Kreminna, which, I mean, is true, sort of, but they're obviously not close enough to kick out artillery that are sitting south of Kreminna. So
things are ongoing, but and I'll freely admit I take 99% of this from Andrew here. I kind of draw a line in my head between where the Russian artillery is and the Ukrainian artillery is. In this case, it's hard because there's Russian artillery everywhere. but that's sort of where I go, okay, the front line is somewhere about there. Here it's different because, as I understand in these forests, there's really a couple main forested roads. You can actually see them on Google Earth on Terrain View and whatnot. And there's been pictures and videos of Ukrainian tanks moving down through them. You can just south of Crimea, you can see them pretty deep, or south of Dubrova.
Where am I?
So yeah, I think you kicked over a little further today. Yeah,
Do you ever just open a map and not know where you are?
yeah. But it's stuff like this. So these roads, I mean, yeah, if you have tanks, you can't just drive them through all the trees. So they're even in a forested area where generally you think, okay, they have to use drones and find us. It's harder to see. It still, unfortunately, has a couple choke points until you get out of the forest. But immediately as you get out of the forest, where are you? You're pretty much downtown in Crimea. So, I don't think we've seen fighting, and at least I haven't heard of fighting in this forested belt immediately outside the town just yet, aside from shelling. And Russian forces have the luxury of knowing that there's, like a good half dozen main roads that the Ukrainian equipment has to travel down unless they're doing other stuff. So it has caused a bit of a slowdown. Is that a fair assessment? Or?
Yeah, I think so. I'm Constantine. What do you have anything to add here?
I don't think, when we see videos, for example, in the pine forest fighting, I don't think we can identify the location. It's just fighting in the forest. But I posted like 2 weeks ago a video where we hit the Russian ammo depot in the forest over here. It's not clear exactly where it is, but I know that it's in that forest somewhere because that's from my friend. Also, I know that there is constant fighting over there, and there are some successes. But once again, when we talk about the success, we are not really talking about, oh, we moved 5 miles. It's usual, like, I don't know, 200 meters per week, maybe. I don't know, something like that. It's hard to understand, but there is movement, and movement is positive.
This northern forest, I really am not sure what's going on here. Some people say that Ukraine is here. I very much doubt that, especially since today, Ukraine reported that Russia attacked towards Terny, which would be like that attack would be like around here. So
Is it possible to attack from a little further to the north? Isn't there a Russian strong point somewhere in this, like near around Chernobyl, Popivka, or whatnot? It's just sort of like
I
that big
think
blue fields.
yeah, they can attack there too. I just don't know if you would call that Terny.
Fair.
I don't know.
There's not a lot between like this whole fielded area. It just sort of opens up. Something I do know is, and this guy's been talking about it. It's online. It's in English. Um, there are some Ukrainian recon teams that have been operating on the far side of the highway on the east side. Ukrainian mainline combat troops are not there, but the fact that at least one or two recon units has been doing this for like the better part of a month now indicates that Russian defenses are not hyper concentrated on the highway itself, or else this dude probably would be dead or gone. Um, I think it's more like around Novo or Chernovo Popivka, but it's that
Yeah.
sort of. I don't even know what that terrain feature is to the east of it. It looks like it's just a bunch of dirt and trees to the east of the highway, but it's somewhere in that area. And again, this is all public information. The Russians unfortunately know it too. Both sides have stepped up their drone usage here. Ukraine has found ways to resupply its forces with drones in this area. Russia has been increasingly trying to find ways to interdict those with varying success on both sides. But he keeps talking about how there's a lot of people on the Russian side here that are suffering from the cold, especially the newly mobilized. They don't really have good cold weather gear. So in some cases, they've gone back to either just openly lighting fires or sitting in their cars and vehicles and whatnot. But there's also been just times it's just like these guys seem like they're moving slower, they're more lethargic, just because they're cold and It's, I don't know what the temperatures there are exactly. It's not cold enough for armored vehicles to move across it, but it is still relatively cold and miserable if you don't have appropriate gear.
Yeah, and there was one point somewhat recently that Ukraine attacked near Holikova. I think they kind of pushed through this kind of forested area. And I don't think it was like a major like infantry attack, but I think it was like recon kind of like going back there.
Otherwise, I mean, we can move down to Seversk and Lysychansk.
Yep.
So currently, there hasn't been any huge change on the ground in Seversk and Lysychansk, though Russia continues intermittent attempts towards the northeast, east, and southeast approaches towards Seversk. Russian shelling has notably withdrawn closer to their own positions in the last week, which may indicate a potential Ukrainian gain of territory or a reduction in Russian forces here overall. Otherwise,
There was a strike today on Lysychansk. I could not I just called it strike here. I don't know where it hit. I just kind of like randomly put it, but the Russians were not too happy about that. But there's some news that Russians kind of advanced in Sperna recently. I don't know when really, but when I compared that news to my map, it was just like right here, and I thought to myself like, is that really in advance, or are they just where they were always? I don't know.
they walked 20 feet forward and somebody photographed it. I mean, because Spurn's been like traded back and forth a number of times, and as I understand it, the town immediately south of it is essentially rubbleized to the ground.
Yeah,
And then that
Berestova, this town does not exist anymore. It's gone. I know that in Sperna they've been attacking these forest strips in the north and this forest in the south. That's where most of the fighting is. And now Russia had got their butts kicked in both places, and now they're kind of like, I guess, trying to move like up these little strips. And I don't know.
which I think is a good broader point here, because it's generally disadvantageous to your health to run across an open field while people have drones and are shooting at you with artillery. Both sides actually do tend to, at least from what I've seen, outside of some larger operations, gravitate more towards these wooded areas along the sides of the fields. You don't generally see people just setting up a bunch of tents in the middle of a farm. They, end up in these forested lines, which sort of become the vectors for both attacking and defending. Is that a fair assessment, or?
Absolutely. And and being in the forest is cold too, especially in winter.
Yeah, there's and plus it's a double edged sword, and this is part of the reason why people like Constantino have been able to send thermal imagery. It makes such a difference on the battlefield because you can still see people even if they're under camo netting or whatnot, and as sort of a consequence, it makes it easier to know where to look because you go, well, they're not standing in the middle of the field building snowmen. There's a somewhat warm spot of forest over here. Let's fly the drone closer. So the prospects of modern technology changing things up on people. So shall we move down towards Bakhmut and Soledar?
Yeah, I just there are a few things to talk about here. Vasily is no longer existing. Rostolivka is oddly relatively safe. It's I've heard from people who have been to Rostolivka recently, and it is relatively safe, which means that the fighting near Rostolivka is still out in these fields. And also, this area of, I guess, would be called Sil, or maybe Soledar. But this area right here, that's kind of orange, is a definite gray area. Is not controlled by Russia. So those are the 3 points I wanted to make.
Thank you. So, following Russian advances in Soledar, Russian troops are continuing to menace towards that northern highway into Bakhmut, near Krasnoplivka, Blagodatne, down to Pitherodny. While Russia has had some successes here, they're not quite able to cut off this route. As I understand it, there's people who are still able to travel along it. This is one of two major routes into Bakhmut, the other one from the west, and it definitively seems like Russia is trying to occupy this area, not just because, oh, we can cut it off, but originally, and this was their stated goal for attacking Bakhmut 5, 6 months ago, was that they would occupy the north, the south, and the east, and they would attack all at the same time. Plus, if they're able to move around Bakhmut, cut off the supplies, it would make things more challenging there. And that's some of the response. People say, well, Russia's been able to get into Pizhrodny immediately outside of Bakhmut. Why aren't they just storming everything through the city? Well, they're trying in some cases, but they are also trying to cut off the supply lines because they recognize that Bakhmut is such a tough nut to crack. If we want to zoom in on Krasnohora, maybe we can talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
So, Ukraine defenses in this area still remain intact, despite Russian forces managing to advance somewhat closely into a wooded region north of the Ukrainian strongpoint. Otherwise, the field, like we were talking before, these do kind of control the flow of battle. Russian forces are not sprinting along these fields to the east. They're trying to come in from a wooded area. And beyond that, beyond some recent gains, I don't really know a whole lot about this area. Andrew, Constantine.
There was talk of a Ukrainian counterattack yesterday that pushed Russia back to this kind of line here. I don't know if you would call it a forest line, but they kind of pushed them back to that.
To the dump. Back to hell.
There was a Ukrainian counterattack that here I'll draw it. It kind of pushed like this and like this. So beyond that, I don't really know. That's I can say that Ukraine right now in this area around Soledar, they're very comfortable with how this situation is. They think that this kind of line, whether it moves a little bit in either direction, this line here, they're very comfortable with. They feel that they can, it's stable. They can hold this for a while. They're not afraid of everything just collapsing at this point.
That's good. I mean, there was a lot of factors that went into what necessarily happened in Soledar. Certain things that were taken advantage of, certain organizations or groups that failed to live up to expectations. But in your opinion, would you say that it seems that at this point the line has more or less stabilized, especially in these more rural areas to the northwest of Soledar?
Yeah, this is where Ukraine thought that the line would be. Ukraine did not think that they were going to hold Soledar forever. They've been planning around losing Soledar. Losing Soledar was kind of like, wasn't their goal, but it was like in their plan. Like Soledar was going to be lost, you know? So this is where they were expecting to hold Russia, and right now they're holding them here, and Ukraine is happy with that.
I can add something to that we discussed with Andrew today a bit. So there is a not 0% chance that Ukraine can take Soledar back. But once again, that's not a 0% chance. I personally don't believe it. I don't think it's gonna happen. I don't think it's a good strategy, but there is some indications that actually Ukraine may take it back. Andrew does not believe it. I don't really believe it, but we have some hope still.
Well, hope springs eternal, and hopefully we'll all be proven wrong on that. Because, like you guys are saying, it seems like a tall order with everything going on, unfortunately. Moving down to Pithrodny. So Pithrodny which has fallen to Russian forces almost 2 weeks ago, has allowed for Russian troops to increasingly menace the northeast residential sections of Bakhmut. However, the Russian forces here appear to be more focused on pushing along those same highways to the north of the city in attempts to cut off supplies and access, as in order to set the conditions for their original plan, which was 3 simultaneous attacks from at least the north, east, and south. Presently, it would seem like they're trying to set conditions for this northern approach. To the northeast of Bakhmut, we're actually looking at it right now, Russian forces have descended from the forested hillside overlooking Bakhmut in an attempt to enter the residential area and menace the final standing Ukrainian heavy defensive location, which has been around for a while in a winery, which otherwise is separated from a river by the Russian forces that have tried to advance down Patricia Lumumby Street. It appears that Russian forces have been unable to decisively seize territory in the residential area via this approach, and they've been skirmishing around about 2 residential blocks. Otherwise, just a little further south on this eastern approach here, Russian forces continue to press onto the residential area southwest of the previously heavily fortified Patricia Lumumby Street. This is an area they had pushed into about a month ago with some success, and then they got pushed out. They're joined by Russian assaults from a garbage dump, which overlooks southeast Bakhmut, where Russian forces are skirmishing around the hilly terrain to the west, but have not yet definitively entered into the South Bakhmut residential zone. South of Bakhmut, around Optin, which apparently it's Opne, and I've been mispronouncing it for 6 months now. Russian forces appear to have seized more territory in the town, which increasingly allows for Russian incursion into the south residential areas of Bakhmut city. Russian troops appear to be fighting for decisive control over the northern half of the town presently, which would be the last major obstacle, and then some fields and some water features before entering the residential districts.
Yeah, now,
Southwest.
I just want to say that this kind of blue line here is like the line of Bakhmut. So like this yellow area is Abitny. So I just want to say that. These roads here are Bakhmut.
Yeah. It's just I'm trying to sort of discriminate a bit here between, because you can still go like I think a kilometer or 2 up the road here. I mean, we're talking about very small areas before you hit this sort of dam bridge, and then a bunch of the residential sections, and then yeah, you're in Bakhmut city proper. Where'd you go? But I sort of say, okay, once we start seeing people fighting in the streets, then we're more in Bakhmut. Although there is some residential areas right there as soon as you cross over that line, as you said. But I'm more worried, maybe worried not the right term, but I am concerned about that area with the dam and the river that's immediately in South Bakhmut, because I want to say that's one of the last remaining major bridges that's still in good condition. And as Russian forces continue to try and push towards it, it could make things, and it's already making things somewhat more challenging for Ukrainian forces that are on the east side of it, because there's a number of rivers that run north-south through Bakhmut. And just from logistics, medevac, etc. So that's an area to keep an eye on. Although thankfully, it's only been recently that Russian forces have been able to make a stab at it from the garbage dump, but they've still got a little ways to go.
Yeah,
Otherwise, sorry.
this area right here, I don't know what this is, but this is a pretty strong Ukrainian defensive point right here. I have no idea what that is, but it's very strong.
And then southwest of Bakhmut, maybe zooming out a little bit, Russian forces are continuing attempts to push counterclockwise to cut off or rather clockwise, to push off the western approach to Bakhmut. They have had some success in recent days with heavy fighting on the town of Klishivka and the fields. Presently, the town itself is contested with a heavy Ukrainian defensive complement in this region. Per some Ukrainian sources, the situation in the town itself is critical and deteriorating, although there's a number of hills to the west of the town that might offer other alternative defensive options. And Andrew can probably talk more about that than I can.
Yeah, it's just this town it's on a hill, and you can see the hill pretty clearly. The town is like beneath the hill and in the valley. So the hill is really what matters. This town is likely either totally or mostly in Russian control at this point. But the hill is still held by Ukraine. And this hill is difficult to attack, partially because of this kind of, they have to go down and up, which isn't ideal. But generally speaking, this is a position that Ukraine has all of the high points, and they're always shooting down on the Russians, and the Russians are forced to charge uphill into defensive positions. So Ukraine has the advantage here. And so far, the Russians have not been able to penetrate the primary defenses of this area. And in addition, Ukraine is reinforcing this whole area from Chasiv Yar, which is actually very close. I mean, it's 10 kilometers. So Ukraine is pushing more and more reinforcements into here, and in addition to that, Ukraine can put their artillery on this reverse slope where they can fire without as much fear of Russian counter artillery fire, because their radar isn't as effective due to this hill that they can shoot over.
All right. Otherwise, I think that doesn't cover all of it. There's a lot going on in Bakhmut, but we might be ready to move down to like the Donetsk, Avdiivka area.
Yep.
So this is an area that I know frighteningly little about. So I'll do it real quick, and then I'll turn it over to the guys who know a lot more. While north of Donetsk city, Russian forces continue to skirmish towards Avdiivka with no notable successes, they continue attempts to assault the Ukrainian river stronghold of Vodyan, which controls access to the supply lines, keeping Avdiivka intact since the earliest days of the war. Doesn't seem that Russia's had any demonstrable success, and it's been months. And then in Marinka, heavy fighting continues, with a shelling just a couple blocks apart from each other. Russia appears to be unable to demonstrably advance through the rubbleized urban area of this suburb, and has been prevented from large movement across the southwestern fields via Ukrainian artillery.
Yeah. In Avdiivka, over the past 2 days, Russia has launched a very large artillery strike on all of the major defensive positions in the south of the city. So they've just been pounding this area. They have kind of, from what I understand, they've kind of stopped shooting Avdiivka itself, because they've been having a lot of fun just kind of shooting civilians. But now they're focusing more on the defensive positions, and then with just massive artillery strikes. There's also been some around Zenith. Regarding Marinka, from the reports that I've seen, Russians have largely withdrawn their primary forces from Marinka. They're still fighting, but they withdrew the bulk of their force, and they've instead pushed them south to attack Pobieda, and which they claim to have entered today, but I don't think that's actually true. But more, they're attacking towards Konstantinivka through these giant open fields. So this is kind of like a risky play that they're doing, because they're sick of fighting in Marinka. They can't take Marinka. They keep saying they've already taken it, but they can't take it. So now they're trying to push through these fields. And today, Ukraine, they reported that Russians were attacking near Paraskavivka. I don't actually. Can you say that, Constantine? I have no idea how to say this. Parasko.
Paraskovivka. Vivka. Yeah, Paraskovivka.
Okay. But they said that they're attacking near this town, which is, I think, a stretch. They're really attacking more like out in these fields. But so this is kind of the new Russian strategy that they're saying, screw Marinka, we're going south. So their goal is kind of to go like this. They claim to have entered here, but I highly doubt it. So Konstantinivka has always been one of their big goals to capture, but they have not been able to get through Novo Mykolaievka. So now they're trying to. So they said, "Screw it, we're going to charge through the wide open field and see what happens." And I guess we'll see what happens.
I guess kind of kicking on down towards Mariupol. Frankly, while Russian forces continue to demolish the Opera House, among other locations where civilian casualties and large quantities of them were reported during the assault of the city, in a location that's obviously they're just trying to cover up war crimes and what have you, while also trying to make it a cultural destination. They're selling tours now to Mariupol in Russia where you can go and watch and see the city that our brave troops liberated and just ignore that so much of it is rubblized, which is it's
Fucking
bizarre,
idiots.
but the Russian ethos is bizarre. Sorry about that. Otherwise, Russian troops continue to transit through the city en route to Russian positions in southern Ukraine. Beyond that, I really haven't heard a whole lot about Mariupol. It's cold. There's issues with heating and electricity. Water issues have gotten a little bit better, but they're still pretty rough, and heating is a challenge.
Yeah, sounds about right. And then they've moved a ton of military people through there all the time.
And Zaporizhia and the southern axis, and including Dnipro, which I guess we should talk about. So the death toll from the Russian missile strike on a Dnipro apartment building on Saturday, the 14th, has risen, with 46 dead and some 80 injured. All rescue and recovery operations have concluded as of yesterday, and no additional casualties are expected. The missile strike destroyed 72 apartments and damaged some 230 more. Is one of the single largest civilian losses of life since the invasion began.
Yeah, there's still 11 people missing from the last I read. It's kind of sad.
It's tragic. I think when they suspended it, the stuff I read basically said we're not expecting to find any more survivors, if I read it correctly. Which it's a really tragic thing, and this is Russia fired missiles. This is also what cost Arestovich his job because he made some very much off color and off the cuff statements that seemed to imply that this was a strike that happened because of Ukrainian air defenses and whatnot. And generally, that's not a positive thing to say, especially when I believe it was an S-300 of some kind,
It was
which
X-22.
an X-22. Okay. They were making a statement that Ukraine couldn't intercept these missiles the way that he was claiming. So it's frustrating for a lot of reasons, to put it mildly. But it has been sort of it's a couple days of mourning in Dnipro and across the country, in fact, because of this. Russian and Ukraine shelling otherwise continues across the front lines, with Ukrainian missile strikes in Melitopol, Berdyansk, Tokmak, and other areas, including Russian ammo warehouses. Russian strikes alternatively continue to target Orkiv and Holeopol, which is just to the southeast of Zaporizhia, as well as to support the ongoing Russian assault attempts towards the Ukrainian strongpoint Avelka and Novosilka, which has not had material success in the last several weeks. Russian assaults around Vuhledar, a previous focus of them, have reduced considerably, with the main thrust of the Russian assault here in this area towards Velika and Novosilka, and skirmishes continuing north of Tokmak. Near the nuclear power plant in the Enerhodar, Russia and Ukraine continue to exchange shelling across the Dnipro River from Nikopol, where Russian forces continue to harass the Ukrainian energy technicians at the nuclear power plant and have physically placed artillery and other equipment, in some cases physically inside the reactors and the artillery outside, dangerously close to the reactor buildings so as to prevent any Ukrainian counter battery fire. And I'm sure I missed a lot about the Zaporizhian southern approach. Is there anything that you guys would like to add?
Um, Yesterday and today, Russia launched an attack on Stepove, which is just south of Zaporizhia. They're attacking from Nesteryanka. They're attacking near Myrna, which I forgot to draw an arrow. But they're attacking near here. They're attacking near Doroshenyanka. So, and I think there might also be another attack in this general area that I don't actually know. Because people keep saying that they're attacking Orkiv from two sides, but I only know of this Nesniryanka part. But anyway, so all of these attacks are. I really don't think there's much chance of success, but they're claiming gray area, I guess. They might be able to capture Marina, which is it was basically abandoned by Ukraine, so it's a no man's land. They've been trying to capture the Russian Yanka, but they've been unable to, and I don't think they have a chance of actually capturing Stepove, but they're sure gonna try. So that's their kind of Zaporizhia offensive for now.
There was some stuff I've been reading indicating allegations from Russian language media that because something that the Russians do is they like to make plans and then they never really discard them. They just say, oh, well, because if they said, oh, this is a bad plan, then it reflects poorly on them. So they just say, oh, well, the circumstances aren't totally right now, but we'll put it on the shelf. And that's part of the reason why you hear about these crazy Russian plans and their propaganda. Oh, they're going to nuke London and all the other kinds of things because, yeah, those plans exist, but so does the U.S. plan for invading Canada. It's not something we're doing until next week. But in Zaporizhia specifically, there were claims that the Russian officer who was just placed in charge, basically taking over de facto for Surovikin, which is good for a lot of political reasons because it diminishes the role of the Prigozhin cult, believes that the troops in Zaporizhia, partially because they haven't lost as much territory, which is more due to a variety of other reasons. He says, "Oh, these are our crack combat troops. We can start a new assault from here." And other people going, "That's not the case. I don't know why you're coming up with that." So it remains to be seen whether these attempts now are that supposed that we're starting an assault, or if they're just more of the same as we've been seeing for several months now, ever since things stabilized in the Zaporizhia front back in March and April.
Yeah, and one thing that I've been reading from the more intelligent Ukrainian sources, they've been noting that Russia has been building more defenses than they've been preparing for attacks in this area. So like this sort of attack is kind of like half-assed, where they're sending people to attack, but the number of people attacking are very, very small in comparison to the number of people here, whereas everyone else is like hastily building defenses because they're terrified of a Ukrainian attack. So, well,
maybe it's important to just touch on what that looks like. While it's not happening now, and it may not happen for a little bit, there has been talk about a Ukrainian assault towards Melitopol for months and months now. And there were some Western news publications alleging that that was actually part of the original Ukrainian plan for the liberation of Kherson, was also a push down here. And then for a variety of reasons, they chose not to do that. Some advisors thought they'd be biting off more than they could chew, among other factors. But without making giant grand statements, I mean, if we zoom out just a little bit more so you can see what's south of Melitopol, it's the Sea of Azov. There's not a whole lot of places. If Ukraine takes everything down to Melitopol, Russian logistics going through southern Ukraine dry up almost immediately. Yeah, I've seen people say, oh, well, they have a navy. They could run things on the shore. I'll believe that when I see it. It's not going to. if and when Ukraine is able to take Melitopol, it does change a lot of the game down here for the Russians, insofar as now you have Crimea, which has a bridge that may or may not be able to be targeted again. And actually, if you get all the way down south of Melitopol, I believe you can target with just regular HIMARS. But it's just not a good position for the Russians, and they are aware of it, and it's something that keeps them up at night. So hopefully, at some point in the future, when we see a southern offensive and it reaches Melitopol, this could very well lead to a larger degradation of Russian forces across the whole southern line, because this is like Kupiansk was northeast of Kharkiv. Everything Russian has to flow through or immediately around it in one way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
Losing-
and speaking of which, there was a unconfirmed report today that Ukraine took out a I don't know, like a anyway, like a train of goods. I don't mean literally a train. Like anyway, I can't remember the word. A convoy. They took out a convoy that was driving from Kherson to Melitopol. So I think it would be on this highway, I imagine. But apparently, Ukraine took out this convoy somehow today.
Good. I think there were some strikes further south of there too. So actually moving towards Kherson, Russia and Ukraine continue to shell across the Dnipro, with Russian strikes into downtown Kherson and Ukrainian strikes broadly targeting the highway from Holoprishtim to Oleshki, which is the major highway that connects to the former Antonovsky Bridge. Ukrainian shelling in the port area of Holoprishtim continues, with Russian forces stationed previously on the Channel Islands here apparently having been dislodged. Russia has increased the presence of military forces on the south bank of the Dnipro, with some citizens, this is further to the northeast, saying that there's 7 soldiers for every resident. Probably a bit of an exaggeration, but they've got a lot of people there. This appears to be a mechanism to ensure total control over the banks of the Dnipro, following some Ukrainian recon activities, which didn't make a big difference, but it was pretty embarrassing for the Russians, and so they're trying to ensure that there's nobody slipping across. There were minimal reported Ukraine artillery strikes on the Kinburn Peninsula recently, although Russia has continued to fire across the bay into Ochakiv, where there's a Ukrainian naval grouping that's been harassing them. And then deep strikes continue in South Kherson around Russian bases at Skadovsk and Henichesk. Henichesk specifically remains a major logistics route from Russian forces in southern Zaporizhia down to Crimea. So depending on when that strike happened, it might have been the same one. I believe that one was a couple days ago.
Yeah, it was the 16th.
The 16th, okay. Otherwise, that's about everything I have on Kherson right now.
Yeah. Today I read a report that Ukraine counter battery fire took out a Russian battery on Kinburn Spit. It was like around here somewhere, but they were really happy about that.
That's good, because they've been just plugging away across the water into Ochaki for a while now. All right, I guess moving to Odessa, the Black Sea, and Crimea.
Yep.
While the Russian Black Sea Fleet was part of the massive missile salvo on Saturday, there have been Russian air defenses activating against unknown targets around Sevastopol. Beyond that, it's been somewhat quiet. I honestly didn't look up to see how many Russian ships are out at sea right now, but I imagine it's not a whole bunch. I think even in the largest salvo, there was like 3 or 4 ships firing. So the bulk of the Russian missiles these days are coming from their strategic bomber fleet, way the heck to the east of Ukraine, either in Rostov-on-Don of Russia, or in some cases over the Caspian Sea. But I guess in terms of general statements, yesterday Ukrainian forces eliminated some 760 soldiers for a total of 118,530, 6 tanks, 10 armored vehicles, 14 artillery guns, 7 cars and trucks, 1 helicopter, and 6 UAVs. On the world stage, the Ramstein meeting of Ukrainians supporting Western allies is due to convene tomorrow, with reportedly a massive arms and equipment supply to be allotted. Already, the international community has publicly pledged to send some 14 Challenger 2 tanks from the UK AMX-10 RCs, sort of light tanks. They've got wheels on them from France. 50 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles from the U.S., as well as 100 of the M113 APCs, and about 18 self-propelled artillery guns. Meanwhile, the UK is also sending another 30 self-propelled artillery guns. Sweden is sending 50 combat vehicle 90s, which they're infantry fighting vehicles. I don't know anything about them, as well as more self-propelled artillery guns. And then Denmark is also sending self-propelled artillery guns. There are additional alleged quantities of several hundred armored vehicles, artillery guns, and ammo for them to be announced tomorrow. The U.S. alone has already announced they'll be spending some $2.5 billion in aid, including 350 Humvees, 90 Stryker infantry fighting vehicles, 60 more Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, 50 MRAPs, which are those heavy vehicles you saw the U.S. using in Afghanistan, and sometimes your local police department has them, as well as 8 air defense systems. In late breaking news, Germany has confirmed that they received a formal request from an unspecified third party, believed to be Poland, to transfer Leopard tanks to Ukraine. This comes on the heels of considerable international and domestic pressure to do so, and numerous European countries pledging to support, pay, or provide for these tanks on Ukraine's behalf. Despite German Chancellor Scholz's statements that the U.S. would need to provide M1 Abrams tanks to Ukraine before Germany would allow for export of Leopard tanks, the new German defense minister stated, quote, "I'm absolutely sure that we will get a decision on this in the next few days," unquote, and that he does not consider U.S. tanks as a necessary condition for Germany to allow access to the Leopards. Elsewhere, the European Parliament adopted a resolution to create a special tribunal to prosecute war crimes and broadly Russian aggression against Ukraine. The Prime Minister of the Netherlands said that his country will send a Patriot anti-missile defense system to Ukraine. There's also allegations that tomorrow there's going to be a number of NASAM systems. Ammo for them is already being provided. Other more modern Western systems. Russia, in stunning news, appears to have placed an anti-air missile system on top of a roof in Moscow for unknown reasons. They lifted it up there with a crane. In Turkey, during the 3-day talks, there was an agreement for the creation of a humanitarian corridor for the exchange of wounded prisoners. Apparently, the details are still being fleshed out, but it's a move in the right direction. And then showing Russia's increased lack of clout on the world stage, the Iranian foreign minister stated that Iran does not recognize Russia's annexation of occupied Ukrainian territories. Previously, they'd sort of danced around the point, said, oh, we're not changing our mind on how we believe things. But this is the first time they've explicitly come out and said, no, this is all bull. And that's about everything I have. I mean, I'd like to turn it over to, anything that I might have gotten wrong or things that can be added.
Well, first, I just want to show this. This is their defense in Moscow. They're ready to go. Look at them.
That looks good. Haters will claim it's fake.
this is how they're choosing to defend their city, and more power to them.
Yeah.
That Swedish vehicle that they're giving is considered one of the, if not the best infantry fighting vehicles.
Can you show us the
exists.
picture of it?
I can.
The CV90.
Yeah, it's there's two. I mean, there's a lot of versions of it, but there's two main versions. One has a 35mm cannon, and the other has a 40mm cannon. I'm trying to find a photograph right now. But anyway, it's here. It's this guy.
Yep. So what's great about it? It has 40mm chain gun. I think it's a chain gun, and yeah. Go ahead.
It's a Bofors L70, I think. 40mm.
And yeah, so it's 10mm bigger than what Russians have, and I'm pretty sure that it's capable of, if not, completely destroying Russian tanks, but definitely damaging them and rendering unusable, or making mobility kills, like taking the tracks off, taking the dynamic ERA off, and just generally destroying all the optics on top of it. And I'm quite sure that if it hits it in the side, it's gonna penetrate it.
I believe they can
So
also
does it
shoot
come?
down helicopters.
They have a radar, or just just shooting.
I'm
Flying
not
helicopter.
100% sure. I think it might have optical tracking. I can look it up at some other time, but I'm pretty sure they can shoot down helicopters as well.
Yeah. What's great about this vehicle is that it's actually mass produced. Of course, it's not a Bradley, but it's producing more than 1,200, I think, is
Yeah,
built,
yeah. There's a lot of
which
them.
allows it. Yeah, so what it gives the replacement base, what I mean is, if Ukraine loses one, it's not the end of the world. There is another one that you can find. Also, it means the spare parts are available for it, and if, of course, it opens up the door for further deliveries. And I would expect that Ukraine can get like up to 300 of those. And it's just overall great vehicle. Its armor, I think its armor can withstand up front up to 30 mm gun, and it can uh, on the sides it can withstand, I think, up to 14.5, but I'm not sure about that. Um, yeah, I think it's 14.5 on the sides. It's a overall great vehicle. I still think that the Bradley is better, but this one has a bit more firepower, and it's just, it's for Ukraine. It's just a breath of fresh air in this war. And how many are given? Around 60.
50, I think, is what I'm looking at here. That's what's alleged on top of other things.
So I can imagine that 50 is enough for. It's actually not enough for a full brigade, but I imagine that it's one brigade needs around 100 uh, full brigade. So I can imagine that this is a first batch. The people are going to be trained. The first part is going to be tried, and then they're going to probably give another 50 to transform the entire brigade to it. I imagine it's the same going to be pretty much with the Bradleys, and the more will come up. So it's absolutely great beast. That super happy that our guys will get it.
I like looking at the whole little family here. Look at them.
Oh, they're very cute.
Yeah, it looks so cute.
It's the whole family.
Let me hug them. Where is the father? Which one is the father?
I think this one's the father, and this one might be the mother. Here's your awkward uncle,
Uncle.
the engineering
That's-
vehicle.
I mean, I think one of the big telling things that we'll see tomorrow around Steam. So I imagine everybody's going to be able to find a bunch of articles on just the massive infantry fighting vehicles, which do occupy that little sentiment because you have, I don't know, Butch should explain this. You have APCs, you have IFVs, and you have tanks, right? We all kind of know what a tank is, right? It's big, it's heavily armored, it's got a big gun, can usually do other things as well. We know what an APC is, and if you see something like the M113, which are rather old, those are often used as like a combat taxi, and they're much better than some of the Russian ones that we've seen, like the BTR or BDRM, where it's a death trap if you're inside. That's why you see a lot of people sitting on top. But then you have the middle ground, something that can get you to the fight and stick around and help you out and not die when somebody looks at it the wrong way. And that's where things like IFVs or infantry fighting vehicles come into play, where they're a little more mass producible, they use more common ammo, they're cheaper, and they can actually participate in the fight. And there's been honestly, I'd argue there's more of a lack of IFVs in Ukraine than tanks right now. So being able to send more of these, helping out with the mechanized section, will help tremendously, especially in things like urban combat, where having the ability to stick around in the fight is a huge boon. And I know that Constantine can talk a lot more about the successes or failures of Soviet era IFVs and BDRMs and whatnot. I think that's more of like an armored vehicle. There's a lot of overlap between these. It's hard to define exactly where the line changes from one to the other. Same thing with tanks when you get up to some of the bigger gunned things like the ones that France is saying. And there's a lot of people arguing about it online. So
Yeah, and it can carry 7 to 8 troops, so it's a full squadron. And it's pretty roomy inside, surprisingly. And I would ask, is it known which version of it is given? And my question is if it has the digital fire control system, because those are usually, those really change the game.
let's see. You said up to
I didn't even know this armadillo existed.
It's a mean looking thing. They said it has the 40 millimeter autocannon and an armored turret. And several variants. I don't think they're specifically saying the variants, but I don't know. Somebody who knows more about that than me can talk about it. But they're saying, there's armored turrets. So I don't know if that helps. I mean, they're all armored turrets. I don't know if it helps to necessarily narrow it down. But I think everybody's just saying they're sending these, but they haven't necessarily fixated on them just yet as to which type. Those will deliver about 50, and it's probably the one. It's called the CV9040, which that's like the largest quantity the Swedish forces have, and then some 50 of those have command posts on them for guiding stuff, and then there's another 40 or 50 of them that are used for guiding artillery. Neither of those have main guns, so if you see one showing up with main guns, it's not those. The biggest thing is just whether or not it has the digital fire controls or whatnot, the ability to shoot on the move, because that would make a big change. And we'll have to see once it gets there. I'm sure more data will come out.
This is what the inside looks like.
It is
with a bunch of old dudes.
Yeah. You have a picture of a BDRM inside?
Here's what it looks like with a little kid inside.
Oh. We can fit a bunch of them.
Oh, nice.
What do you want to look at?
The inside of like a BDRM or a BMP.
Oh.
Those Russians.
Yeah. Those are much more cramped, much more miserable. And in some cases, on the oldest ones, the BMPs, which both sides have had to use, because those are the ones that were given to Ukraine earlier, as well as in their existing stocks. I believe they actually have a fuel tank or an auxiliary fuel tank in the rear door, which doesn't always get filled up, but that's generally going out of the door because your vehicle's on fire and now you have gasoline that's sitting there that's also on fire. Considered a bad time. So, I mean, Constantine, I think you might have more experience, riding on or being around these than any of us. What's in,
I don't have too much experience riding them, but yeah, they really cramped. They are really they have really low. You see how people are there, getting out of the thing. It's
Can't take it seriously. It's
yeah.
Well,
that's the first one.
I have been inside of a BMP one, and it was a terrible experience. I feel like if you're taller than like 5'6", you're not gonna fit.
So you can imagine if you have 8 people, how long it's gonna take you to dismount. The guy that is like the first guy, I mean, he falls out. It's fine, and yeah, it feels like he has to fall out of it. I don't think he's capable to land on his feet. So the second guy has, in this really cramped up space, he has to move like around a meter or 2 feet to get to the exit. then the third guy is like it's much further, and the fourth guy and is like it's a disaster for him. It's really hard to crawl back. I don't know how they move in, and getting in is the same problem. The benefit here, however, is that you're not gonna twist your ankles when you're doing it, and this is an important part, not twisting ankles. And another benefit of such a small cramped up space is actually the fact that your vehicle is quite low. And it gives its lower profile, allows a better survivability. However, it's another problem because the BMP has way too low profile. I would say that it's needed, and as a result, the gunner cannot see anything through the sight if the terrain is not really, for example, if you go into the sunflower field when and it's at its peak, you're not going to be able to see anything because of how low the vehicle is. So there are some advantages, some disadvantages between this profile in general.
This image here is a
But
BMP3, by the way.
Yeah, so they have, as you can see, they have to sit with their knees, their ears, and it provides additional. If you plug your ears with your knees, it provides additional sound isolation. So that's another bonus that they have. But I'm joking right now. If no one understood my stupid jokes. Yeah, and I would suggest that it's way too low. The profiles of all BMPs are way too low. They need to be higher, really higher.
I believe these doors open, at least on some of the BMPs.
Yeah, on the third one, it's been upgraded. The dismounting hatch opens to the side, and it's a bit easier for, like, you can actually get up and move out. And yeah, but it's still not. I would suggest that dismounting from this one is much faster because you are on your feet. Like, you, of course, you're bended a bit, but you're on your feet and you can actually move.
Yeah, I'd much rather be in the CV90.
And then the Bradleys that are being sent as well. I mean, this is where it's not like against like. This isn't a video game or where you say, oh well, I have a tank and all tanks are created equal. I have an IFV and all IFVs are created equal, because things are different. Right? That's why people are giving so much hullabaloo about the Challenger tanks the UK is sending, because I believe they're. I don't think any of them. I think only one of them was ever destroyed, and that's because another one shot at it and got a lucky shot. Like, otherwise, they're just behemoths. The same thing goes with a lot of these infantry fighting vehicles, where they're very capable. And in the first Gulf War, or at least the U.S. ones, ran into a bunch of Iraqi tanks and just annihilated them. Like, it was bloody and disgusting how quickly that went poorly for the Iraqis. And that's sort of been touted as a vision of supremacy, because they can do more than just shoot their main gun. They also have missiles that they can fire off the top. And really, any of those striking a Soviet tank, is the Soviet tank's going to have a bad time. So it's the fact that they are smaller and more mobile does have a benefit. They can go places that tanks can't. Certain bridges that might be too heavy otherwise, or the vehicle might be too heavy to go across, especially in rural regions. So keep an eye out. It's telling that the Russians put out some statement about, there's nothing to worry about. These are old vehicles, ignoring that most of their vehicles are far older. And then this is how you get rid of it. And this Russian official strategy for how to deal with this is basically to walk up to its side and shoot it with a rocket launcher. Like, that's when they say, you'll just get really close to it and then blow it up. It's like, okay, I feel like you may have missed a couple steps there. But it's, nothing's a silver bullet, but it does make a good difference. And there's enough of them out there that more can be sent, which is also important. Parts, equipment, so on and so forth, because things get damaged, things get destroyed. I don't know how many Bradleys exist. I know it's a lot. So, getting trained on them and starting to standardize that is always a good thing as well.
And this is the internals of of a Bradley. They look reasonably comfortable to me.
And then the strikers too, which are also a big deal. Those I've been in; those are rather spacious, all things being even. Those are the ones with the wheels.
Yeah.
And that'd be sort of like the U.S. answer to like what a BMP is, or I guess whatever the
BTR.
Russian BTR, yeah. And it's legitimately night and day.
Yeah, the crew comfort. I mean, I've been in a BMP. It's not that hard to find your way into a BMP. There's a lot of museums around the country and probably around the world.
I thought you were talking. It's easy to get inside of it, and
No.
tell you it's not.
But there's so many BMPs that you can just like people just put them outside and you can just like walk into them, like a lot of museums. So like I've been inside of one and it's just so awful. Like I can't imagine having to fight in that thing. I think it's terrible.
Yep.
That's about everything I had. I mean, was there any topics that you guys wanted to cover?
So I wanted to say that also Ukraine gets, except for BMPs, it also gets a lot of artillery. United States gives, I think, 18 howitzers, M109s, M109A4. I think it's not the new one, not the newest one, but it's quite capable howitzer still. Just hope that they will come in good condition, because there was problem with that before. Also, Denmark, I think, pledged to provide all the 19 Caesar howitzers that they have. It's an absolute great news for us. Also, I think Sweden also promised the archers, which is some consider it to be the best artillery system in the world, but everyone considers their system to be best in the world. I would say that according to its technical specs, it's really good, but no one knows how it's going to be in the field, because it was not actually fielded properly. There is not too much experience of using it. Maybe you will find out that this part does not work, or just you have to use it in a certain way, find new maintenance problems, and but still it's absolutely great that we're getting it. I'm quite sure that even if any problem is going to be found, they're going to be addressed and fixed quite quickly. So those are great news. So and we're still waiting for more, because I think Ramstein conference is not over yet, and probably after the conference, give it 1-2 days, we're gonna hear even more weapon deliveries.
I forgot I wanted to show a video about Marinka. So here is
Please go ahead.
Here's a video.
Yeah, almost nothing left.
This video is sped up, or is he just zooming around that fast?
I'm sure it's sped up.
He's gonna fly into the fire.
So when the Russians are saying that they have liberated or took control over, this is what they mean. It's even worse than Mariupol, like times and times worse, as you can see. I cannot say times, but it's a smaller city, and it's.
But it's erased. It doesn't exist anymore.
Is this a Russian or Ukrainian video?
I honestly don't know. I assume it's Ukrainian.
Because what's notable to me is the lack of any. I mean, obviously people could be in these buildings, but there's not a lot of activity of anything on the ground. It's just
Yeah.
Asia.
It's just just everything is destroyed. It might be Russian. I really don't. I don't know. I saw it on a Ukrainian account, so but that
It's
doesn't
just interesting.
mean anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's just it's just really depressing to see what has happened to that city. But yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to share that.
I mean, there's a city of like
Thank you for
11
sharing. This is absolutely.
people before the war, and now it's gone.
Yeah, and before February, Ukraine had done a lot to fix up the city that had already it was already devastated, and they did a lot to fix whatever they could, because like, and there's like I've actually talked to people who were there cleaning the city, in 3 or 4 years ago, and now it's just totally gone.
It is sad.
The LPR and DPR are still around. I mean, they're the ones doing like a lot of these attacks in like Nebelska and and Vodiana. Like these are all DNR. I think personally that those soldiers are like the best soldiers in the Russian army. But there aren't as many of them as there used to be. A lot of these towns, like the Russians, only have like maybe like 200 people here, and like 50 here, and like maybe like 300 here. And this is kind of their DNR forces. There have been some information leaked out of the Russians about exact like regarding we can't do another attack because we ran out of men and we need emergency reinforcements, and then they get told do the attack anyway. Like they're kind of abused, but they still exist. Just don't really talk about them that much anymore.
I want to say they broadly got folded into the Russian military after Russia claimed annexation over the territories there. At least the casualties seem to be accounted for altogether now on the Russian side. So from a bureaucratic standpoint, at the very least.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like technically they're in the Russian army, but the Russians don't really consider them Russians.
No, they've been abused for a while, and there's the Russian military. It's like a prison culture, right? There's a hierarchy. Sometimes that's racial, cultural. You've seen that with Russian ethnic minorities from the Far East. You've seen that with other, minority groups in Russia. You've seen that with their, forcibly conscripted Ukrainian citizens. And there was some allegations, among other reasons, that this part of the reason why we saw such a high level of brutality against the civilian population northwest of Kiev and elsewhere, because it's slightly, I don't say it's a different ethnic group, man, it's Ukraine, not Russia, the whole way through. But Russians were told, oh, you're liberating the territory of Donetsk, and then they get to Kiev and they say, oh, these people are totally different, and then suddenly there's a lot of abuses. although they've also done that in some of the towns that were, frankly, much more positive towards Russian propaganda in the East, and then they've wasted their goodwill there as well. So it's more of the same. But yeah, no, it's not a good position to be in. Conscript soldier for Russia. It's not a winning career move these days.
I have some videos from Solidar, but I have to look through them to see if I could show them because some of them might be really bloody, and I don't want to show blood.
On Twitch.
Yeah.
I shared a nice video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
Unfortunately, we cannot show it.
yeah. Otherwise, I don't really know a lot about Twitch. I don't know if there's like chat or questions or anything that people have.
One person asked about the GL SDBs. Do you know the timeline for their delivery? Because I don't. Or the quantity.
So that information hasn't been disclosed yet. They're the GLSTBs, ground launch small diameter bombs. Real, very basic. They're mass producible explosives that can go for quite a distance, more so than some of the things Ukraine has. There's been a lot of talk about why weren't they announced tonight when the U.S. said we're saying $2.5 billion of aid, including this. Some people have made the point that because these are newer weapons, I want to say they're from like 2020-ish, that they fall under a different provision of the U.S. military, and as such, they have to be authorized via some other arcane process, which is something to look out for. Beyond that, we don't have any idea on the quantity or the timeline, but as I understand, they're pretty ubiquitous in that it's sort of like a kit that straps onto existing explosives, if that's fair. So they're useful for that as well. They don't, it's not like a HIMARS system where it's one single, very technological. You need to bring everything. And I think these can be used by HIMARS as well.
Yeah,
I want to say
they are. Yeah, they are.
it's like 150 kilometers or something like that.
I can't remember if it was 100 miles or 100 kilometers. It was 100 something.
100 miles. I think it was 160 kilometers.
And
So that's 100 miles.
basically the way it works is it's like a sort of a Frankenstein between two weapons. One is just an explosives that I think the U.S. has in large quantities. It's some kind of dumb bomb, and then they basically strap a rocket motor onto the back, and then a bunch of other electronics and guidance packages. Now, the more munitions that are available, the better. So the fact that even though these are still relatively new, if they're able to say, "Oh, and now Ukraine can head out to call it 150 kilometers or whatnot," and they can do so at leisure because we have a large stockpile of these, that's a good thing. Think about what it was when HIMARS was reaching out to 80 kilometers and all the Russian ammo depots had to generally move back. Well, now they have to move back another, 50 kilometers, 60 kilometers or so. So it's iterative gains, and the fact that there's more of them means it's easier to supply them, or at least that's the hope. But we haven't gotten any official confirmation on them past that. In a lot of statements in the media. Were there any other questions?
One person asked about the pansiers on top of buildings, and yeah, we have seen it. It's the new Russian look. This is their new architecture. This is what they're going for.
They lift up one of those and put them on top of, I want to say it was like a Ministry of Defense building or something in Moscow. And everybody's sort of standing around like, why are they using a giant crane to lift one of these onto the roof? And at this point, everybody's guess is as good as yours.
Rosie asked, is Russia making limited advances? What is the difference? How do you see Ukraine countering?
The difference in terms of, it varies depending on the area. Like, there have been continued limited advances around, the Soledar and Bakhmut region. in the south. I mean, we are talking about. We're not even talking like a mile here. We're talking a couple 100 feet in some cases. There's been some areas to the northeast that Russia's continue to push, but we're not seeing that same sort of surge forward that we saw in Solidar when things were going poorly there. Kashivka is rough and challenging in a lot of ways, and so we are continuing to see Russia expend combat power there. Um, Otherwise, with Ukraine, I think as you were saying, there's a lot more question marks around where they're gaining stuff around Crimea that hasn't necessarily been shown. But the Russian stuff, they're basically going to lose the town. They pulled a lot of people out of it, and then just as I understand, said in really massive quantities of recently mobilized soldiers, which did kind of blunt the offensive. But it's a big battlefield. It's very. That's a question I've heard a lot as well. Who's winning? Who won today? It's very difficult to just say, oh, this was all good and this was all bad, because the more you look at it, it's always shades of gray. So Ukraine was able to get some high ground, especially up near Kuzmivka, allows them to do more things in the future. Russia was able to clear some territory around Pidhrodny. Could use that for more actions in the future towards the highway. It's very difficult to say this is a good thing, this is a less important thing. It's a lot easier, at least from my perspective, to say this is a thing, this is what could happen from it. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know what you guys.
the main reason Ukraine is not doing counterattacks, especially around Bakhmut and Soledar, whatever. The reason they're not doing counterattacks, I mean, they're doing small counterattacks that where like maybe a platoon attacks, maybe a company attacks. They're not doing anything really larger than a company. So and the reason why is because first, they don't have enough armored vehicles to do such an attack. They do have Ukraine has a reserve of armor, and they have never used that reserve for a counterattack. So it makes you wonder, are they saving that reserve for when they really need it? Like if some desperate thing happens, like for example, like let's just say somehow Russia pushes through Klishivka and pushes through Chasiv Yar. Chasiv Yar is the anchor of their defensive position. So if they pushed through that somehow, maybe that's when Ukraine would do a counterattack. Then they would unleash their reserves. But Ukraine has really never used that reserve. So that's so they don't have enough armored vehicles, and because they don't have enough, they are taking care of their reserve and really protecting it. So if Ukraine had more armored vehicles, then you would see them be more mobile and do more of these counterattacks. Then, if they had another 2,000 armored vehicles, like maybe 1,500 more infantry fighting vehicles or something, and then like 500 more tanks or something like that, then maybe they would counterattack and take back Solidar, or maybe they would counterattack and push back into like Kodema and Zaitseve, and maybe they would do these sorts of things, but they don't have that, so they don't. Then they're taking care of their reserves. It's kind of their what they're used as like a last resort, really, and then they have not used it yet for anything. How big is the reserve? I don't know. We know that like all of those Polish tanks are in the reserve, and like all of those like tanks from like Chechnya, those are all in the reserve. So that's like like 200 tanks or something, or 300 or something. So
It's interesting though, because this was several months ago, so who knows how things have changed. But just from the observed losses, like there's pictures, Oryx spent a lot of time focusing on it. Demonstrably, while Ukraine had lost, let's call it 400 tanks or whatever, they had captured like 600 or 700. So it was something where even on top of everything we physically seen, Ukraine has captured more tanks than they had, or has more tanks than at the start of the war. Obviously, things get damaged, things get destroyed, things may not be in the best condition, so who knows what that is now. But when you see the Russians increasingly moving to older tanks like T-62s and having to get their crews basically weld their own armor onto the outside, it's not a perfect situation by any means on the Ukrainian side, but it is demonstrable who is better with them, among other things. And then getting more modern NATO standard tanks will hopefully change the nature of the battle as well. Although, just to push back on it a little bit, none of these are silver bullets. None of these are the thing that wins the war on their own. There's always going to need to be more of them, and more variants, more quantity. So if you see, one of these gets blown up, it's despite what Russian propaganda is going to tell you, it's not quite the end of the world because tanks get destroyed every day, unfortunately.
Soledar, the issue in Soledar was as a result of a rotation. And it's unfortunate what happens, but it happened, so there's nothing you can do about it.
Russia was able to exploit troops coming in as troops were going out, and some weren't necessarily able to fulfill their defensive duties as well or as effectively or as quickly, and thus they were able to kind of stage a breakthrough. It's unfortunate, but he said it's something. It's only really a mistake if it's something that people can learn from. Although there were casualties, unfortunately.
So Rosie asked if the Russian supply lines are working, and they are. The Russian supplies, they are working. They are getting supplies where they need them. There's occasionally localized issues, like Ukraine can destroy, ammo that supplies like one little area of the front. But generally speaking, Russia is getting supplies where they need it. And in addition to that, they are building a reserve of supplies, of ammunition, etc. I'm not sure where that reserve is, whether it's in Ukraine or maybe it's like in Rostov or whatever, but they're building a reserve of ammo and other critical components and supplies that they are not using in combat. So they have enough supplies to push stuff to the front, and they have enough to build this reserve. So the Russian supply line is not collapsing, unfortunately. It's not working as efficiently as it could because Ukraine is targeting all of the ways that Russia could make it efficient. So Ukraine is doing everything it can, but Russia is still getting supplies. So we've been going for about an hour and a half. I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to say. Konstantin, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I actually have to run soon, so
Yeah.
I think we'll be running about 2 hours now. We started at 7, now it's 9 where I am at least.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to just once again reiterate that it was a good day in terms of Ukrainian support all over the world. And this types of an amount of weaponry that has been promised can be a game changer overall, because it changes the approach to what Ukraine is getting. And also, I would like to know that it actually scratches the top of the like it only opens up the barrel of weaponry, because for example, 100 Bradleys, when the United States has 600 of them, 6,000 of them, is less than 2% of what the United States has. CV90s, it's only 10% of what Sweden has, and less than less than 5% of what the world has. Same goes for martyrs, like 40 martyrs is a really low number. There are more of them. Of course, they have to be brought to the right, go through the conditioning and recover and be rebuilt to some extent. But what this shows is just the process is in, and Ukraine will get what it needs. I wanted to say that because before we're leaving. And another great news that I wanted to add: Russians are. We started at Kuzemivka and Novoselivsk. I can tell you that Russians are suffering really large losses in Kuzemivka because they're trying to hold it. That it's on the right in front of us and it's easy to control. So they are just losing people, sending more, losing people, sending more. I don't know how long they're gonna hold.
We have.
No, I gotta run.
Okay. Okay, bye. All right. So,
I'm about done too, I think.
okay. So,
Thank you for hosting
We're-
this, though, man. I
we're
really
done.
appreciate it. Yeah.
all right. Thank you, everybody, for coming and listening.
Cheers.
Bye.